Sorry about the security system. If you can hear him upstairs, sorry about that.
That's okay.
I think my wife's walking in the door.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the LAC Candidate Forum with Hopkins Public Schools candidates. We are the Legislative Action Coalition for Hopkins Public Schools is a nonpartisan advocacy group comprised of school board members, parents, students, and community members, organized to advocate for education funding and policies at the state and federal levels. And we are so happy to have some of our amazing candidates here with us today that are seeking to represent Senate District 49, Representative District 49A, and Representative District 49B. So welcome, everybody. I appreciate you being with us today. Wanted to let everyone know who is here with us today. We have Melissa Franzen from Senate District 49. Who else? These are the people we invited to come. Julie Dupree chose not to participate in this candidate forum today. We are waiting on Heather Edelson to join us. We're thinking there are some issues with the link. And then we also have Steve Elkins and Joe Thalman.
Oh.
And I am going to share my screen so that everyone can follow along with who is here today. So we have guidelines for constituent questions. We sent those out and gathered them before today's forum. The LAC does not support or oppose any political party or candidate. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates and not those of the LAC or Hopkins Schools. This purpose of this forum, and I am going to ask the candidates, if you are not speaking, to mute your microphones. And then the purpose of this forum is to offer an opportunity for voters to hear the candidates discuss important education issues that will affect students and families in our school district and across Minnesota. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves and 1 minute for a concluding statement. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question presented by the moderator. The order in which they will respond to questions is being selected by our Google randomizer. The timekeeper will present a running timer to keep track of the 2-minute countdown. The moderator reserves the right to utilize the mute feature if a candidate exceeds the time allotment, and candidates will be selected in random order. So we can get started with our questions that were sent to the candidates in advance of this forum to give them time to prepare. Oh, that's right. Sorry. This is my first time moderating, so bear with me as I figure this out. So we're going to go with our 2-minute introductions for each candidate, and the order from the randomizer has selected Melissa Lopez Franzen to go first.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for hosting the LIC forum so we can learn more about each other, our candidates, and the priorities for education in Hopkins School District. It's been my pleasure and honor to have represented Hopkins School District among other areas of my Senate District 49 for the last 8 years in the Minnesota Senate. I was elected in 2012, re-elected in 2016, and now I'm going for my 3rd election. And it's a 2-year term because of redistricting. And I look forward to working with all those stakeholders and partners in education, we have a big challenge ahead with education and other areas of the state budget with our deficit that we're facing due to COVID-19 and the economy slowing down. I am a mother of two little kids, one a kindergartner that started 2 weeks ago, and it's very different school year to say the least, and I have a preschooler as well. So I am invested in education and public school education, and I am also looking forward to making sure that we, to the extent that we can, hold education budget harmless, because we're asking so much more from our teachers, our administrators, and our parents. So we need to be a good state partner and find ways to invest in education, and knowing the difficult decisions that will lie ahead, partnering with each school district, because they're not all created equally and have very different challenges and diversity across our state, from rural to inner city to suburban. So I am excited to also have been part of the Education Policy Committee in the past, higher education. I currently serve on finance, transportation, and health and human services. And I've also served on taxes. So I'm pretty versed in the state budget, and looking forward to working with all of you to ensure that we have quality education and access for all, and that we overcome this pandemic together. And I stand for questions with this forum and look forward to answering them. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we will hear from Steve Elkins. You need to unmute yourself, Steve. We'll all get this down.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Steve Elkins. I'm the current representative in House District 49B, which includes 3 precincts in in Eden Prairie and Minnetonka that are within the Hopkins School District. My wife and I, Judy, have been residents in our home in Bloomington for 35 years. Our 2 now adult daughters are both products of the Bloomington public school system. Judy and I were active volunteers in the Bloomington public schools the entire time that our daughters were attending them. I've served on 3 task forces for the Bloomington public school districts, one for technology, one for transportation, and actually chaired the very first Bloomington School Start Times task force back in the 1990s. I'm not serving on any of the education committees, but I understand that basically we're a brain power state. Our whole economy is driven by the fact that we've got a superior workforce because of our superior education system, and we need to make sure that we support that and do a better job of closing the opportunity gap that is out there as well. Because if we don't do as good a job at educating the next much more diverse generation of students that are coming up now, as well as we educated our own children, the state's economy is not going to be able to thrive. Our schools are under extreme stress right now because of COVID-19, and we need to make sure that that we're maintaining and perhaps even enhancing the funding that we provide to local school districts, so that they're able to rise to the challenge without having to resort to levy referenda again to raise our local property taxes to make up for the lack of state support. So thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. Next, we will hear from Joe Thalman.
Hi, and welcome to all who are watching online, and to those who are not and see this later. Welcome, and I would love to hear from some of the parents and the students. I understand that Hopkins innovated and employed the Canvas online system. I'd like to know what kind of results the students are having and if that's well received. I come from a long line of educators. My mother, my grandfather, my aunt, my cousin, and my stepdaughter are all were educators at one time. My mother taught at the University of Utah and worked at the PBS station there, and I was actually recruited to animate, not Elmo, but Count Von Count and who are the other characters? Bert and Ernie and Oscar the Grouch when I was a kid. So I grew up kind of around a college campus at the KUED, the PBS station there. So I have a lot of background. The family's had a lot of background in education. All well-functioning, prosperous, and wise cultures and civilizations have seen the benefit of investing in education. It's in everybody's benefit to have a well-educated populace. And this year with the COVID challenges, I really feel like the big challenge now, especially for the younger kids, the older kids in high school, they have more autonomy. They have the basics to govern their schedules and kind of direct their own learning. But the kids who need the basic fundamentals really need to be back in school. They need to be getting the personal guidance and advice and the in-room enculturation with the kids, their peers, learning behaviors that are appropriate. And we're going to find somehow to make that happen. Of course, the involvement of the parents is always the force multiplier. And with that, I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. So we will now move on to questions that were sent out to the candidates in advance of this forum. They were given time to prepare their answers. So I will share my screen so that we can see what those questions were.
Yeah, there you go.
1 second. So here's the first question that was sent out to the candidates. Currently, school boards may not start the school year before Labor Day unless there are extenuating circumstances. Also, of all types of taxing authorities in Minnesota, including cities, counties, school districts, watershed districts, sports facilities, commissions, mosquito control districts, etc. School districts are the only type of taxing authority required to conduct a referendum in order to renew or increase the property taxation rate. Do you support allowing locally elected school boards to set their own school calendar? Why or why not? And do you support allowing locally elected school boards to renew an existing operating referendum by a majority vote of the school board after a public hearing? Please tell us your reasoning. And the randomizer has selected Steve Elkins to respond to this question first. Thank you.
And remembering to unmute. Yes, I think in terms of allowing school districts to set their own calendars, I mean, the current school calendar is basically a relic of the agrarian age, when it was necessary to allow school children to be off for the summer so that they could help out in the fields. Right now, we have a school calendar that's dictated by the tourism industry, which doesn't want families to be precluded from taking vacations in Minnesota during Labor Day weekend. I think that's also an antiquarian relic, and I think that school districts ought to be able to set their own calendars, especially in times like this when flexibility is at a maximum. And you know, a school district could be shut down because of the pandemic for a period of time at any time. And now more than ever, schools really need to have that flexibility. And in terms of the second question, yes, like all local governments, I think that school districts should have the ability to establish their own tax rates, renew referendums with the vote of the board, and not have to go back and take it to the voters time after time after time, just renew the same levy. Referendums are expensive. There are a lot of work, and we ought to be able to trust the local elected school board members to make that decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Next to respond to that question is Joe.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I definitely think that, as Steve points out quite well, we don't need to be wedded to the ways of the past in the agrarian society. I think some parents that I've spoken with, while they're dealing with the challenges of teaching at home and these hybrid schedules, they're also finding some opportunities to do some great things with their kids during the week. Some people are really enjoying spending time going out and golfing with their kids or taking them to the parks or zoos. And I think when government is closest to the people they serve, and the decisions can be made at the closest level to those who are receiving the benefits or the services, it's a more beneficial system for all. So I'm definitely in favor of letting school districts determine their own school schedules for the year. And I spent quite a bit of time in Southern California. They even had year-round programs there, which met with varying levels of acceptance. But it's not like these have been untried. There are samples from across the country of where some of these flexible programs have been implemented, and we can learn from those. Secondly, on the issue of the referendum, I believe that it's an expedience and a convenience to allow the school board to continue an existing referendum. I think if the parents, if the taxpayers in that school district have an issue with it, if the system is abused, that there would be a recourse for them to pursue. But as long as that is not abused, I don't see any problem with that.
Thank you, Joe. And next, Melissa.
Thank you. And I do want to add, I agree with what both speakers have highlighted as the need for flexibility and to evolve with the needs of the schools and the districts and families. And as we learn more from research, what's available. And obviously during the pandemic, we've had to be very flexible, and parents have had the choice to decide whether they are home and doing the virtual learning. And every district has had the challenge, but also the opportunity to be very creative. So I do support having the opportunity for districts to choose what's best and what timing to start school that's best for their district, for their community. They know them best. So I have no problem with that. And I know that up north there is more of a tendency in the resorts community and rural communities that have a resort economy to have that flexibility as well, so they can continue to open past Labor Day. So I'm open to it. I'm flexible, have always been. And on the issue of the local elected school boards and renewing operating referendum, I think after a public hearing, I'm all about transparency and notice and fair notice. So I've always been hesitant on this one because of what that would look like. So I would be open to having very transparent language in that law to allow for a hearing that everyone has access to, and it might be more than one hearing, is my point, to make sure people know what they're signing up for, know what they're voting for, and if someone comes new to the community, that they don't just get surprised with the price tag of an operating levy that they had no idea was happening. So I'm really all about the disclosure, but I think it would save a lot of money, a lot of time for school districts to do it in a way that they don't have to go back every time to the voters. So I am open to it, but the devil's in the detail of the language of the bill.
Thank you, Melissa. Our next question is distance learning and the changes made to educational delivery during the pandemic have been particularly hard for families with special needs and those students needing extra support. What are your plans for ensuring that schools are able to meet those needs? And we will hear from Joe Thalman first.
There we go. I saw that the students at Hopkins High School are all loaded up with Chromebooks. It looks like those have been issued to the students. That's a tremendous advantage. That's a great resource. Now, we need to make sure that those kids have adequate internet access at a reasonable speed. If there are any households that are finding that they, for whatever reason, some people have dead zones or they don't have adequate access, they need to go with a different server or something, If there needs to be some kind of a subsidy made so that those kids or either can stay at home or go to a community center that can provide that access, I think it's kind of mandatory that everybody be equally empowered with internet access. So that's one thing that I could offer. If I happen to be elected to the State House and come January, I'm sure that there would be some proposals that would come out of committee and that would need to be considered. We don't know who's going to be on those committees or how they'll be staffed. So there are a lot of variables this year going forward. It looks like Hopkins has done some very innovative things with the issue of great technical equipment and going with a great platform with Canvas. And I do want to know how that's going. Please feel free to reach out to me at joeformn.com. My number is 949-836-0082. I don't have the answers, but if I ever have my hands on the levers of power, I'll do what I can to make sure that the kids in the district and the faculty and staff get the equipment they need.
Thank you. Next, we will be hearing from Steve Elkins.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's a real danger while we're reliant on distance learning for learners with special needs to fall even farther behind and worsen the achievement gap. And in addition to learners with special needs per se, also learners who just need more support in order to keep up because they're coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. And I think that first of all, once we're able to get back out of completely distance learning and back into hybrid models, I think that we need to make those learners a priority for getting them back into the classroom or some kind of a personal classroom settings, because they're, I think, in many cases less likely than other students to be able to adapt to the distance learning environment. Certainly from our part, as Joe said, we need to make sure that to the extent that we are reliant on distance learning, that that every learner has got access to the bandwidth and the computing power they need to take advantage of the platforms that the school districts are making available, like Canvas. I was lucky enough to be able to tour Hopkins High School myself last year and can vouch for the extremely innovative learning programs that the Hopkins School District is offering there. And then for our part, we need to make sure that as schools are having to just kind of roll with the punches on this, that the legislature is providing them with adequate funding to make sure that they've got the resources that they need to be able to roll with the punches and adapt to the technologies that are being required right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And next we will hear from Melissa Lopez-Franzen. And just to any of you, if you need to rehear the question or if you would like me to read it again, please feel free to ask.
Thank you. And I think this is a very important question, and certainly have heard from parents through March and when the pandemic started here and hit in Minnesota, and we had the first stay-at-home order for parents that were very worried about having access to the resources they need for their kids, and also the issue of being isolated, because we don't want these students who might need some special services to be even more isolated because of the pandemic. So I think one of the things that needs to happen is the resources need to be there, and I believe students with disability, anyone with disability, has a constitutional right to have access to what they need to be part of education and public education. So we know that the federal government has never really kept their promise with special need funding. And we know that that's always been an issue for state budgets and school budgets, excuse me. So we will have to make sure that we do not make that issue or exacerbate the issue there. I also want to work with experts. I'm not the expert on special education or even students with autism that might need some services in addition to the supports they have in school. And I've heard through the news that some districts have been doing some in-person reaching out to families and doing some in-person services, and they're very individualized. So how do we support that as a state, as a school budget, to make sure that that all districts have that resource, and that not only the students are safe, the families are safe, but also the provider and the teachers and whoever else is providing services is kept safe during the pandemic. So I think the technology issue that was raised by Joe, we have put some funding in there with the CARES Act. And the question is that has been, whether it's been enough, who else is being missed, and making sure that all students have access to the education, the resources as equally as we can do it in the middle of a pandemic, so everybody remains safe and everybody has the same level of opportunity of learning.
Thank you, Melissa. And we will go on to our final question that was provided before the forum in advance. Question 3. A proposed constitutional amendment was brought forth last spring regarding the state's obligation toward public schools. It is designed to replace Article 13, Section 1, a part of Minnesota's state constitution since 1857. This proposed amendment will likely resurface post-COVID-19. What is your opinion of its proposed changes to the current language, which does not include any, quote, provisions by taxation, unquote, for funding Minnesota's public schools? And each candidate was provided with links to the full language of the current constitutional amendment as well as the proposed amendment language. The candidate responding first to this question will be Joe Thalman.
I should down to Mystic Lake tonight, coming up a winner of these. It is kind of going into a dark cave. The operative phrase there was most likely will come up in the next session. I don't think we can really assume that anything is going to be as normal just because something has been tabled and is laying on the table, that it will resurface in the next session. There'll be so many moving parts. I'm going to reserve judgment until if that time I happen to become a part of the legislature, that we can actually look at what is actually coming from committee, whatever is going to be revised. As they say, the devil's in the details, and to even speculate right now is just getting over our skis, I think, in my opinion. We need to see what's really on the table, what resources we're working with, and what ink makes it onto the paper, and we'll take action from there.
Thank you, Joe. Next, we will hear from Steve Elkins. I really did hit refresh on that randomizer, I promise.
Statistics can do that to you sometimes. So I think that the constitutional amendment, the proposed constitutional amendment, and the primary advocates are Neil Kashkari, the head of the Minneapolis Fed, and retired Supreme Court Judge Alan Page have been very strong proponents of this. Essentially, it would replace the current constitutional requirement for a uniform system of education across the state with the requirement for a quality education system throughout the state. I think that the amendment, the proposed amendment, is very well-meaning, but as was pointed out in the phrasing of the question to us, it doesn't directly address the financing of the system. Whereas the current constitutional language has been litigated to death. The state of the law is well settled, and as a result of the current wording of the Constitution, back 50 years ago in the era of the Minnesota Miracle, that requirement for a uniform system of education across the state became the catalyst for the state taking on most of the burden of financing local education and taking it off local property taxpayers, because the property tax capacity among school districts can vary wildly, and it was resulting in what the court said was an unconstitutional difference in the education available to students in high property tax capacity districts versus low property tax capacity districts. The current system, since the Minnesota Miracle, has meant that school districts throughout the state, you receive at least a consistent baseline of adequate funding. And I think that that's very important, and I would not want to risk that.
Thank you, Steve. Next, we will hear from Melissa Lopez-Branson.
Thank you. And this is a very important conversation, and the people that are behind changing the Constitution, one of them is, like Steve mentioned, Justice Alan Page, who actually swore me in as an attorney. And I look up to him, and I look up to the work he's doing in terms of getting more focus on equitable education for all. And I have concerns, which I've expressed to both Neil and to Justice Page, on what the unintended consequences of this would be. I'm an attorney, so I know, especially now when there's so much eye on the U.S. Supreme Court, that it takes time to change the law case by case. And there are some limitations of who can bring a case, and it does take resources. So while well-intentioned, I do have a lot of questions of how this would play out in Minnesota, where you can already clog the already strained courts we have, and whether we are going to need more judges to litigate, and who can come to the court. Is it a family that has resources, or is it a poor family who doesn't and has to rely on no representation and do their own advocacy? So there's a lot of questions there. I do support fully funding schools, but there are limits in the middle of an economic recession like we're having. It's going to be at least $6 billion as far as we know right now of the deficit that we're experiencing. But we do, like I said in the beginning, I do want to hold schools harmless. This is such an important, we've learned so much through this pandemic of how important schools are for families, for delivering meals, for delivering the care. Childcare also stems from that. So I am, and again, as a mother of 2 little kids, I am not looking to cut schools. I want to make sure that they have what they need, and that all kids, regardless of their zip code, have the same level of access to great quality schools throughout Minnesota. So at this point, I do not support the amendment.
Thank you, Melissa. So we requested questions to be submitted to us from our community, and we're going to move on to those. And just a reminder that as candidates, you each have a 1-minute conclusion to give at the end after we are done with these questions. So the first question from our community is, do you support vouchers, expanded tax credits, or other taxpayer subsidies for non-public schools? Why or why not? And we will go with Steve Elkins first.
I don't. I don't want to see the revenues diverted from our public school system. Minnesota has been a leader in establishing charter schools as an alternative. And we have tons of school choice available to parents in Minnesota through the current system that we have, which also includes open enrollment across districts. So I think the availability of choices that we have today already are more than adequate, and I would rather see that funding remain within the public system, school system as it is.
Thank you, Steve. Next person to respond to that question is Joe Thalman.
Yeah, I guess Minnesota created the charter school system to begin with, and it was originally to be a laboratory of new ideas, innovative ideas, and then those were to migrate to other schools in the area and across the nation. I believe it's now 37 states, if I'm not if I'm not mistaken, it was 37 states have now adopted the charter school program for students and the parents who want to enroll them in those programs. I've just read so many amazing success stories about charter schools in various parts of the country where they have closed the education gap. And I mentioned earlier the one that I was particularly familiar with, the Harlem Success Academy. It's just a really successful story. The kids are coming out of there achieving high standards of learning, testing well, and getting into tier 1 colleges across the country. So if we're serious about closing the education gap, I'm not really concerned about the means we take as long as we get the outcomes that we want, and that those options are available for every family in all communities. Some may choose to go to schools that cater to their background, historic backgrounds, culture, or religious backgrounds. And I think it's healthy to allow parents and students to have the option to choose what's best for their kids, what they want to focus in terms of their children's education towards more academic, more arts, or STEM program versus more of an artistic track. And I like the flexibility. I think the parents and the students like it too.
Thank you, Joe. Next, Melissa Lopez-Frenzen.
Here we go. Thank you, and I'm muted now. I do not support using tax credits or vouchers to support private education. And the reason is because we have limited resources, and we know we have huge gaps in education in our public school system. And Minnesota has great reputation of having some of the best success and great schools, but we also have the biggest disparities. So I don't want to dilute the already strained system, because we know we need to invest more to close that achievement gap, change the face of the education teaching profession, so we have more diversity that represents the students that we're seeing, to meet them where they are. And I also think we need universal childcare, which is propping students and getting them ready for K and preschool. So there are a lot of things we can do with the current tax base we have with the public school system, and it's in our Constitution to support education with our taxpayer dollars. Nowhere in our Constitution does it say we have to do it in the private sector. I am a product of both private and public education myself, so I see the value, and if someone wants that, that is your choice in Minnesota. And there are scholarships for those programs too, that a lot of families benefit from. And to the point of culture, there's many different models out there. So we have great school choice in Minnesota, but we have a wonderful education system, which is the public school system, that we still need to ensure its quality, that it has access to all students, like we were talking earlier about special needs. We still have, we don't have the funding there that needs to come from the federal government. So we have room for improvement and to make sure that we all have access to those services. So at this point, I do not. I have in the past supported school scholarships for early childhood education, and I believe that's it's in our interest to support that, to ensure that we have kids ready for our K through 12 system.
Thank you, Melissa. Our next question is, schools have changed how they deliver education, but not how they assess student achievement. What are your thoughts on changing how we measure student success? And we will start with Steve Elkins.
I'm not an expert on testing, but I do think that it is important to measure student success and performance over the course of a year. I don't think we should get carried away, but I don't, I'm a data guy. I'm an economist by education and an IT information architect by vocation. And I believe in the saying that you get the, you can measure the importance of something by, how you measure it. The things we measure are the things that we value. And I do think that it's very important to measure student performance and measure student progress, both to identify, things that the student may need to learn that they're not mastering, and also, quite frankly, to measure the performance of the school system as well. So again, we shouldn't be getting carried away. We need to be testing what we really want people to learn, but I do think it's important to have some measure, some amount of testing.
Thank you, Steve. Next is Melissa Lopez Franzen.
Thank you. And we've all heard that we either test our kids to death, or we have test anxiety, or we teach to the test. I served 2 years in the Education Policy Committee, my first term. I had no idea how much testing went on and how controversial testing can be. I really do believe, like Steve, that we have to measure progress, and that we should do it in a more, I guess, using more technology, more ways to do it versus one day that we may or may not show up physically and mentally, and then that could mark the rest of your life, if you will. We should do it earlier too. I think there's a gap between in the early years where there could be some more enhancement of how we can help students with resources. And at the same time, I don't believe in cut scores, that you should, if you had a bad day in school, or you don't graduate from high school. We've been very vocal about those types of tests that are not very indicative of how well a student is doing. So some longitudinal tests, that testing is a big business too. But I think we should be asking for better methods of how we evaluate our schools, our teachers, and our students, so we can actually really excel and be able to give the students what they need in terms of educational opportunities. And certainly testing schools is also a tough place, because we know certain areas, it's not fair for the areas where they're located. So we need to take that into account, that testing is not the end all be all, but that we also have to ensure that students and families and schools have the tools they need to succeed. So testing is complicated. I'm not the expert. I no longer serve on that committee, so I'm sure it's evolved in the last 6 years since I've served on it, but I am open to new and better ways of doing it.
Thank you, Melissa. Next, we will hear from Joe Thalman.
Thank you. I really have a great deal of sympathy for the many students out there who suffer from test anxiety. And I've known many people who perform just fine. They are perfectly competent in the material, and their test anxiety betrays them on the test. It's hardly fair to those kids with that kind of stress level. And the exaggerated amount of testing that's gone on. I mean, back in the day, we would do, I guess, a test kind of at the end of the week, and then one at the end of the month, a quarterly test. That seems plenty adequate. I think if sometimes it enhances our understanding of two options. If you move to each extreme, if you were to just test, there would be no learning. If you were to just teach them without testing, we're going to find out, I guess, when they take their college admissions exam, how much they've absorbed over their education. I just think we're better off spending more time and more resources in the classroom, focusing on the meat and potatoes, if you will, of the core curriculum that they need to master for their various paths in, I'm thinking of high school, but especially at the early levels, getting those basic concepts and removing that stress from, those young kids, and especially in the environment where we have thrown them into now. A little bit of bewilderment going on, and the masks and everything. It must be a strange time to be an elementary student. And let's just go a little easier on the testing. If it's creating that much stress and diverting that much time and resources, let's just tap the brakes on that and come back to a little bit more reasonable level of testing and more education, more training in the classroom.
Thank you, Joe. And I think we have time for one more community question. And we will start off getting a response from Steve Elkins on this question. Students are spending more time than ever online. How will you ensure that students learn the digital literacy skills necessary to be strong citizens, differentiate quality information from that which is unsubstantiated, and create for themselves a safe and healthy virtual space?
That's a great question. And it brings back memories for me because I actually learned how to use a personal computer from my older daughter Michelle's kindergarten teacher. They were introducing computers for the first time into the Bloomington public schools, and they wanted the parents to be as computer literate as the children. And then we actually followed that teacher. The next year, Bloomington established kind of a quasi public school, quasi charter school called Hillcrest Community School. And we followed that teacher and a couple of other of the most innovative teachers in the Bloomington School District. And one of them was a woman named Thea Fulton, who was an expert on teaching kids how to use libraries and other resources, and then it evolved into online education. And she really did a great job of teaching them critical research skills and critical thinking skills. And I think it's exactly that kind of an education that's needed to help kids adapt to the pitfalls of doing research in the internet age right now, where if you search hard enough, you can find anything you want. The late Senator Daniel Penrick Monahan was famous for saying, you're entitled to your own opinions, but you're not entitled to your own facts. But in this day and age, it seems like everybody does feel like they're entitled to their own facts as well. And so, teaching kids how to make those critical distinctions is an extremely important skill.
Thank you, Steve. Next, Joe Thalman.
Thank you. Shannon, can you repeat the question?
Yes, I can.
Thanks.
Students are spending more time than ever online.
Mhm.
How will you ensure that students learn the digital literacy skills necessary to be strong citizens, differentiate quality information from that which is unsubstantiated, and create for themselves a safe and healthy virtual space?
That's a challenge, not just for the students, but for each of us in our online lives, because really you can find so many parallel truths, if we allow that term to be used. The skills of autonomy are not really talked about. Kids live in a very sophisticated world. They're exposed to more than we can even imagine. Their lives are moving at probably 5 times faster than our lives were in elementary school and high school and middle school years. Even for parents who are monitoring what they're doing, the kids are doing online, even for involved having software installed, kids are going to have access. The cow's out of the barn, you might say. I mean, they live in a digital world, and I hope that they exercise some great restraints, tap the brakes on some of the things that are out there that are not beneficial to them. As parents, as grandparents, I mean, there's really only so much we can do. I've seen kids who lived in very restricted environments who can't wait to get out there and just find all they can. And that's true with whether it's drinking in the household or drugs and everything. Kids want to explore, kids want to get out there. They'll find their way. I have great confidence in their abilities to navigate the complexities of the world they live in.
Thank you, Joe. Next, we'll hear from Melissa Lopez-Franzen.
Thank you. That's a fantastic question. And I think you got really great answers from the 2 panelists here. I would just add The saying of it takes a village to raise a child, it really does. And now more than ever. So it's going to take parents, it's going to take teachers and our community. And we are in a very different world right now. It's full of anxiety on many levels. You can grab your phone and read what you want and have access to information that we never knew we could. Legitimate or illegitimate. People can literally write up whatever they want and post it on social media and claim it as their truth. So it's a very difficult environment to parent. And I have, like I said, 2 little ones that I'm going to have to raise in this environment. And we can't legislate common sense. We can't legislate curiosity and civility. But I think when it comes to the school setting, we can have policies in place that support those families and communities and parents and teachers and students. We did pass the anti-bullying bill my first term, and it was very controversial. And certainly we pass laws that have good intent and always have to be looked back and say, are they doing what they intended to do? But now we know that that was a wise decision, I think, because it is happening. People and students are losing their lives and are being bullied in ways that we would never have identified had we not had a state guidance to have schools have a policy in place to support them. We also have talked about duty to report. How does that evolve in a school setting where there's so much that's thrown at you and families? And one thing that's really important in my mind is counselors. And we've been trying to close the gap on the disparities in counselors. We have one of the worst ratios in the entire country for counselors. And I think after this pandemic, we are going to need a lot of counselors, and not just in school settings. We're going to have a huge mental health crisis that we're going to be able to identify and have data on, because we're social animals, and we are not operating that way right now with the pandemic. So I'll leave it at that. But thank you for the question. It was great.
Thank you, Melissa. So our time is at the point where we need to wrap up, and giving the opportunity to each candidate to share 1 minute of a closing statement. And I got my randomizer going. First, we will hear from Joe Thalman.
Thank you. That's perfect. I'd like to thank LAC and Shannon for moderating, doing a fine job, and my co-panelists on the dais today. I just want to say that the Hopkins School District seems like it's in really good hands. The technology that has been deployed to the kids, the innovative things they're doing, especially in the high school. I'm more familiar with what's going on at the high school. The innovations, the adaptations that the kids they're kind of coming up with on their own. I noticed that the band serenaded everybody coming back to school, and I thought that was a really classy adaptation and a great esprit de corps. And just people are finding ways to adapt and make things better. So more power to them. The principal out there, Principal Ballard, the kids seem to love her. She's doing a terrific job out there. They're in good hands. I have great faith in all of the kids, the students, and the faculty adapting through the challenges of this year. And good luck to you all. And thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Next, we will have a closing statement from Melissa Lopez-Franzen.
Thank you to the LAC, and again, Shannon, for moderating and for always being open to having these discussions in the public and bringing this information to the public. It's so important. I want to make sure that people vote regardless of who on this panel, but that is your right to exercise, whether it's at the local level for school boards, but in this case, November 3rd, we have the entire legislature is on the ballot. So I ask for your support because I want to continue to serve our community and making sure that we have adequate funding for education and making sure that students have what they need to be successful, and parents as well. Give each other a break. This has been unprecedented. We hate that word, but it has, and it's still going to go on for a while longer, and we have to take care of each other. There's no other way to get through this. So thank you again. You can count on my support, and certainly I'm always have an open door policy in the legislature, and I hope I can serve you again for another 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. And a final statement from Steve Elkins.
Thank you, Shannon. I would likewise like to thank the Hopkins LAC for giving us this opportunity. I have to say, in my 2 years in the legislature, the Hopkins School District has done an outstanding job of communicating with its legislative delegation. You guys do a really good job of making sure that we all have the information that we need in order to represent you guys well at the Capitol. This is these are tough times for all of our school districts. And we're going to do our best to make sure that you have the resources that you need in order to get through these difficult times, to make sure that all of your learners are able to succeed under these difficult conditions, and including the ones that don't have the necessarily have all of the advantages that some of our families are able to provide. So thank you again for this opportunity. And I pledge my support to the Hopkins schools. In fact, all of the school districts in my district. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And I just want to give another thank you to all of the candidates who have showed up for this forum. I appreciate hearing your thoughts on education, and also thank you for your kind words about the work of the LAC. We appreciate being in partnership with our legislators, and are always grateful for your time and your care of our families and our students. So thank you for being here today, and thank everybody for tuning in and watching this live candidate forum, and appreciate everyone's patience as we learn how to do this in very, I will say it, unprecedented times. So tune back in. We're going to take a little break, and then we will be up in at 4:30 with Senate District 46. So thank you both. Have a
Thank
great
you. Stay safe.
You too.
Thank you, guys.